I've had 2 boyfriends most of my life. I currently got legally married, thank God. I've had some kinky sex. I have tried drugs through the younger years of my life. I am broke as shit. I have a judgment against me from some bitch down there in Florida. Carol Baskin. I consider that bitch to be one of the biggest terrorists in the exotic animal world.
The Cynic Radio Podcast.
Hi, I'm Chad L. Coleman, Tyrese from The Walking Dead, and Cuddy from The Wire, and you are listening to the Cynic Radio Podcast. Here are your hosts, Cynic.
Hey, the facts are Spider-Man belongs in the MCU. Sony was delusional thinking they didn't need Marvel, and now he's back. And we, the fans, are 100% proudly responsible for that.
Agree?
As long as DC wants to make dark and gritty movies, they're going to lag behind Marvel in every category.
And Ryan.
Batman vs. Superman is objectively better than Infinity War.
IG, did we just forget Kim?
You guys completely suck.
This is the greatest show of all time.
This is episode 139 of the Cynic Radio Podcast, and I'm your anti-TikToking host, Cynic. And joining me, as always, 3 people who have been practicing social distancing their whole lives, Igri, Ryan, and Kim. And on this week's show, the accumulated binging and snacking has formed up around our waists, and the shut-ins and bored people look up to the heavens and shout, "Save us." And Joe Exotic replies, "Carol fucking Baskin." We break down the pandemic, which is the Tiger King. I generally open up with something snarky, or at least kind of funny, or at least I believe it is. But I'm going to hit you guys with this one because deep down, it's the moral conflict of the whole shit show of the documentary, which is the Tiger King. Ryan, where do you land on zoos? Are they helpful educational tools and fun for families? Or are they morally reprehensible to lock an animal in a cage on display for the rest of its life?
I definitely fall on zoos being necessary. You know, as we become more urban as a society, we don't have a connection. A lot of us don't have a connection to wildlife. So I think zoos are definitely educational. I think it's on the zoos to be, to treat them as well as possible, to care for the animals, to give them as much space, to try to, mimic their habitats as much as possible. And then, but I don't, I'm not a fan of these kinds of roadside zoos. And I think that there should be high standards to, have a zoo or anything that where you're, showing animals. And I think, animal interactions should be severely limited. And I'm talking to somebody who's participated in some of these things. And I think that, in hindsight, I think that there, you really should limit interactions unless there's things that are educational and that you're sure that it's not going to affect, negatively affect the animals. So yeah, I think you kind of have to have them, especially in our society. But as much as you can, make sure that the animals are well taken care of, I think that's really important.
How about you, Kim? Where do you fall on zoos?
I think legitimately ran zoos are great for preserving species that are getting ready to go extinct. And it's a good way to safely rehabilitate animals and to reintroduce them into, revitalizing the population. For that, I think that it's quite useful. I have never been to a legitimate zoo that I felt like the animals were being mistreated in any way, shape, or form. The Jacksonville Zoo here in Florida is mammoth. It's huge, and you can just take a train through the entire place because there's no way you're going to be able to walk and see the entire thing in one day, because they give the animals that much freedom, that much free space. And it's not just cages like you see in some smaller zoos, but it's free range. There's acreage that they can actually run and enjoy, having a somewhat normal life. So I think that that's really cool. But these, he was saying, the roadside jungle, if you will, the zoo, is kind of tacky, especially if they're going to be pay to play, give me $50 and you can take a picture with this, little tiger cub, because the life expectancy of the dollar for what that tiger is worth is, what they say, 12 weeks. And once it hits 12 weeks, there's really no use for it anymore. And a lot of them are being put down, which is defeating the purpose.
How about you, IG? Yay or nay?
Yeah, well, funny enough, you're talking about those like small zoos or things that you used to see like on old TV shows where you had like cages right next to each other. We used to have a zoo here in my town where it was just like that. You'd have cages lined up one next to another, and the first one would be a big python, the next one would be a tiger, the next one would be an orangutan, and they were all in basically one building. But that place was a publicly funded place that did a huge fundraiser and bought all the space around it and actually built habitats to try and give these animals a more natural place to live, and built like huge cat enclosures and built something they've got a polar bear there that they built something that it could swim around and act like a polar bear. And I think educationally, like if you never see these things, the Disney movies don't really do enough justice, with the nature series that they do. Because if you've never seen a polar bear or a tiger or a lion, maybe you just think it's like the movie The Lion King, where those were things that maybe existed, but maybe it's just animation. So it's one of those things where it's kind of a catch-22. Like, I can see where it would be a bad thing to cage these animals up, but then, of course, I own pets. I mean, what's really the difference at the same time? So people that have dogs and cats and everything, dogs and cats all were wild animals at some point too.
I'm right with you guys. I think it's a matter of the level of care and the level of area that they have to live. Like, how much effort are we putting into recreating their surroundings? And I'm sure if we could ask the animals, they probably prefer not to be confined for life, but at the same time to preserve species or to educate children. So maybe, they don't go step on a frog, or maybe they're discouraged to go shoot a ram. I've been to the Bronx Zoo and I've been to the San Diego Zoo, and I've learned more in those days than I have watching documentaries or TVs just by walking through and reading about each species. And I always have a lot of fun when I go to them. I always look forward to it. And I've never walked out of a place saying, oh, well, I feel bad for the animals, because they all do look very well taken care of. Kim, we make light of your current home state of Florida, the lack of laws, its odd inhabitants, the behavior. Were you surprised that this twisted tale didn't take place more in the Sunshine State, or was it just the right amount?
It was one of those things where, how sometimes at the end of the week we're sitting down, we're recording our show, and we're doing some news. And Jason always has to say something snarky about Florida. And to be honest with you, as soon as that first opening montage came on, I thought, God damn it, it's Florida. It's Florida. Jesus, of course it's Florida. Why not? He fits the bill for the, atypical news headline. So was I shocked? Not really. But I was really kind of hoping maybe we could put the spotlight on someone else for a change.
You having insider knowledge, I mean, what do you think it is about that state that the people do such odd and zany things?
Right. So have you been here?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Then there is no logic to this place.
What I've also heard is that I forget what it is, but something about Florida actually releasing information in a way that's different from other states. So I think part of it is also the things that happen are crazy. And I do think there's a special, Florida is special with quotes, with air quotes.
So special.
But at the same time, I do think there's also a part that I think it's police reports or something like that those things get kind of published right away, or published in a way that's a lot different from other states. So it's part of it's the craziness of Floridians, and part of it's also just that we have a little bit more access to information. So that's why we hear all those crazy stories out of Florida. So maybe, can cut a little bit of slack in that way. But I still think
everyone's mugshot is available online.
Yeah. So
I think Florida really just defines crazy with the heat. Ryan, we touched on during the documentary that back in 2011, before committing suicide, a man in Zanesville, Ohio, let loose 49 dangerous animals, including 18 Bengal tigers. Should ownership of these deadly predators be strictly regulated countrywide?
We're talking about dogs and cats, and to a large extent, they're domesticated, and there's certain animals that can thrive in homes. But I think in general, animal ownership should be regulated. There's so many people that if you just make them go through the same process to get a driver's license to get a dog, and at least show people what it, some people, oh, that dog looks cute, they get it. And then, after the cuteness wears off, they just don't care. And so I just think in general, people should be more responsible, as far as understanding the responsibility of having a pet, but definitely when it comes to exotic animals, there's no reason. Maybe if you're running a sanctuary, and again, there's a rigorous process to vet people and make sure that they're keeping them in the right conditions and that they're not profiting from, or exploiting I shouldn't say they're not exploiting the animals, but yeah, like there's no reason why any human should own a tiger. It's just unreasonable. So yeah, I think, especially with exotic animals, there really should be severe limitations on anybody getting their hands on them.
I mean, how much do you have to hate your community to do that shit? You're like, well, I'm done living. So, set forth the Kraken. I'm just going to open all these cages and fuck it. Let's see what happens. I see owning a tiger a lot like flying your own plane. Because you can afford to do it doesn't really mean that you probably should. Just ask the Kennedys how that works out ultimately. IG, now that we've done our civic duty and touched on the serious issues raised by the show, I'm going to let you touch on the meat of the story, which is Joe Exotic. Are we looking at a manufactured persona, or is this guy the real McCoy?
The truth is, I think that is 100% who he is. And maybe there's something going on with just having to live life as a gay man beneath the Mason-Dixon line, where somehow he was able to put himself in position to own a bunch of land and have a bunch of tigers and somehow convince straight men to come and be by his side. And there are people out there that are snake oil salesmen that can literally sell you your own shoes. And I think Joe Exotic is that man. I think, through the power of television and us being able to sit at him from a distance, it's easy to sit and make fun, but I'm pretty sure the dude is very charismatic. And if you were in his presence, you might like to be around him and want to have a beer with him or something, because there's no other explanation. There has to be something going on. And this is all based in absolute fact. I don't think they dramatized a single thing in this whole series, which is awesome and just absolutely terrifying all at the same time.
Well, and they also showed a lot of video flashbacks of him from 10 and 20 years prior, and his attitude and everything was the exact same, his mannerisms and how he was. Yeah, I feel like the more money that he made, the more paranoid he became, and the more problems ultimately started to affect him. His mindset and his mentality definitely started to take a change. Now we know that, there was obvious drug issues and whatnot, but what are you going through in your life that possesses you to own 290 tigers and have 2 husbands?
It's called a shitload of money and meth is what you're going through. But Kim, I fully understand Joe's issues with Carol, because what she was doing could have potentially shut down his operation and cut off his money and his meth. But in taunting her, are we seeing a prime example of being clever is no substitute for being intelligent? I mean, he had to know that she was wealthy, and wealthy people love to sue.
All of his problems with her could have been non-existent had he just shut up. Had he just kept his trap shut, learned to possess any kind of restraint whatsoever, he probably wouldn't have had the issues he had. But I feel like he had a personal vendetta against her for some reason, against trying to get her convicted for the death of her husband. That has nothing to do with the big cats.
Yeah, but if you're looking for mud against somebody, you're going to use whatever you find. She obviously was running like a semi-legitimate operation, and she's a friend of PETA. So there wasn't really anything he could do but make it ugly and get down in the mud and wrestle with her. And, a missing husband that was deemed dead is definitely a way to do that. He reminded me in this situation, I had a boss when I first got hired on in my job, and this guy was the worst person in the world. He would come to work drunk. He would drink on the job. He would bang prostitutes in the office on the job. He would disappear all night on the job. And you know what finally got him fired? It wasn't the things that he did that he should have been in jail for or fired for. He told a dirty joke to a female employee, and it wasn't even a good joke. And that's what ended up getting him fired. And for all the things that Joe Exotic should have been in jail for at the very end of this, taunting Carol or getting sued for taunting Carol was like the least of the things that he was doing. But being clever is no substitute for real intelligence. And he showed that, whether what it was he was doing with the zoo as far as transferring ownership. You can't go online and show pictures of people with horse penises attached to them or make threats against their lives and not expect to be sued.
Or shoot a paper mache effigy of, or was it a blow up doll of Carol Baskin and then shoot it in the head. Like, how did you think that was never going to come back and bite you in the ass?
No, yeah, he's not nearly intelligent as he thinks he is. Ryan, we often tease you about working multiple jobs at the same time, but during the episode, we witnessed one of the tamers or one of the staff get their arm torn from their body by a tiger. She just rubbed some dirt on it and kept going. Would you still be employed there if something at your job ate your arm?
No, that I mean, it was like, I'm impressed by the loyalty though. Like, yeah, she had gotten her arm bitten off. Not only does she want to, it's like, all right, amputate it, right? You know, because I would be all for, you know what, do whatever you got to do to save it. But she's like, amputate it. I'm going to go back to work, not make a big deal of it because I don't want them to close down. I mean, there's a loyalty there that I would not have for somebody, especially, you know, it didn't seem that he cared all that much. You know, it's like his concern was like losing the business. Not like, oh my God, you know, she might lose her arm. I mean, maybe they have a closer relationship. It's something that obviously I'm sure there's a lot we didn't see, but it was just, I'd be done. Like, you know, and things like, I'd love to work with animals. Like I think in another life, you know, I'd be like, you know, working at the Bronx Zoo or something, but yeah, I would not be in a position where I'm sticking my hand in a tiger cage. It just does not sound like a good idea. Seems like a recipe for disaster.
I can't believe Saf went back to work like within a week.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
That's insane. Like I know people that like, you know, like twist their ankle at work and don't come back for 3 months.
My mom was an amputee and she was completely laid out for months, unable to frickin' function. So the fact that she was back doing any kind of duty within a month is just like wild.
There was a couple things that really bothered me about that sequence. Not only did I believe she was a female, right? Not only did she lose her arm, but the complete lack of self-awareness as Joe Exotic ran around with an EMS coat on. I don't know if you guys noticed that or not. Completely inappropriate, seeming that he was the one that caused the problem and he's not there to help her. I haven't been around a ton of amputees, but I don't know what cheap dime store hospital she went to get this done, or maybe she didn't have skin grafts after it, because the one thing that I could not focus, I couldn't take my attention off of.
The calloused stump.
Well, not only that, while she was talking, you could see the tendons and stuff moving back and forth on her arm. And I've never seen that. I worked with a couple guys that were missing limbs. And I mean, it was completely sealed and cauterized and skin graft. I don't think she got any skin grafts after that happened. I think they just sealed it and let it go.
It did look like it was improperly cleaned and cared for during the healing process because it was very thick skin. And normally whenever somebody loses a limb, you know, they leave like a patch, like a square of skin, and then it's folded over, you know, to cover the wound and then, you know, stitched up. But that was not apparent at all. It was like, it almost looked like she went to the Joe Exotic hospital right there on site.
She got it done at the gift shop?
Yeah, like, let's just literally rub some dirt on it and maybe slap a Band-Aid on this bitch and get back to work.
I'm going to guess that he doesn't offer health care to his employees. And so it might have been one and done.
$100 a week, I bet not.
Yeah. Considering they're only making $100 a week and all the spoiled meat you can eat, I guess not.
Yeah.
Pop quiz, IG. What would be more of a reason for concern for you personally as an individual and a father and a lover of pizza? A, the ex-drug lord that may be feeding people to the cats at his private zoo that he won't let anybody in. B, Doc Antil running a new age cult disguised as a zoo to get young women to sleep with him. Or C, the flamboyant pizza chef may be getting his expired meat toppings from the Walmart dumpster out back.
Ooh, it's gotta be the pizza, because they're feeding it to people unknowing. Right? It's like, hey, go to the gift shop. We've got lunch and everything. Go up there. Fresh made pizza. The Doc Antil stuff, though, is, you know, I go back and forth in all of these episodes, and each episode comes out a new winner on top. It's like watching WWE where the belt is changing hand every week, because after every episode, there's a new person holding the championship belt. Nope, I'm the craziest one. Here's my belt. And Doc Antil definitely got it a couple of times during this run. Because holy cow, man, the dude was able to like just have a harem full of women that I don't know how the hell these guys do it. I might have to go down there and take lessons or something. I don't know what's going on, but that is crazy. But literally just getting random scraps of meat out of a dumpster that like you probably shouldn't even be feeding the tigers. Because, you know, I know tigers can eat meat that's been out in the sun and been spoiling for a while and everything, but these are animals that have lived in a more domestic setting for so long that their digestive systems probably aren't used to it.
And pizza toppings.
Not only that, a lot of the meat's processed too. So they're not getting, you know, it's not an antelope off the plane. They're getting Oscar Mayer bologna, which I wouldn't feed that to even Ryan. You know what I mean? Like, I'm certainly not going to feed it to a tiger that's used to, you know, wild game. After being sued and losing to Carol, there was a tragic fire at the GW Zoo, killing a bunch of alligators and destroying items that Joe would have had to surrender to her because of the lawsuit. Kim, is there any doubt in your mind that that wasn't an accident at all?
Oh, I definitely think that was arson. Likely sparked by Mr. Joe Exotic himself, if you will. Just too coincidental that the information that they would have been seeking happened to have been locked up in there because that's where his office was. Who keeps their office off-site, you know, in a completely different building with a boatload of alligators? That's not where you put an office. I mean, unless that's what your security system is. So it was just a little too suspicious because every single clip that they show you throughout the entire miniseries is that his office is in the main building that's right behind the gift shop. His main office is right behind there. So why was all of a sudden his main office?
Yeah, that was his production. That was his production studio. That's where they did all the production for his Joe Exotic TV shows.
But that's also where he kept all of his ledgers and all of his books and all of his transfer and bills of sale and all of that stuff that he would have had to have surrendered to authorities. And all of a sudden, all of that stuff wasn't in his actual office. It was moved to a production studio. Come on.
Well, not only that, Kirkman, that Rick Kirkman guy. I mean, IG, we do a Nothing podcast about silly topics, and he had hundreds, if not thousands of hours of the zoo and Joe's interactions and stuff, and he didn't back them up on a hard drive ever.
Right. Like, why would you be keeping those there? I mean, he'd run like Inside Edition and other things like that he was doing shows for. So he was a quote unquote professional. Why is all your stock? Why is everything staying on site there? What are you doing, man? Like, at least make copies and send it off somewhere. I mean, even like local news places normally make copies of their news broadcasts and send them off somewhere. So if they need archive footage from somewhere, they can get it. I don't understand. Everything seems fishy. The more you look at it, everything just seems like there's more to the story that they aren't telling us. And they've told us a lot. So the fact that there's still stuff we don't know about is insane.
Ryan, we tend to stay away from politics on the podcast, but if you're a listener, you know where we land politically speaking. So let me ask you this. A second term for our current sitting president, or would you usher in the era of the exotic? By me simply asking you this question, are we a step closer to the movie Idiocracy?
Yes. And I would take Joe Exotic. I'll go with it. He cannot do worse. So I will go with Joe Exotic for president.
How about you, IG? Would you throw a vote for Joe?
Well, I guess it would depend on who his running mate is. I mean, if he really just tried to mend whatever fences he had out there and put Carol Baskins as vice president, he absolutely can have my vote. Hey, look, if I'm going to go crazy ticket, I want full crazy ticket. You know, like, he's going to have to get one of those people.
Well, IG, in the sea of scumbags, and considering the shell game that Joe was playing with the zoo, ruining everyone's life by transferring ownership to them, including his own mother, by making her owner, and then now she's has to go bankrupt. Was there a bit of poetic irony when Jeff Lowe entered the picture and basically stole the zoo out from under Joe? I mean, the bigger scumbag eats the smaller scumbag in almost every instance, right?
Isn't that how it always works? And because especially if you get so far underneath that you have to go find that bigger scumbag who really isn't as big a scumbag as he puts out to be. Everything's just kind of smoke and mirrors, but he still signed over all the stuff, right? Which made it all belong to the bigger fish. So Is there some irony, some poetic irony in that? Absolutely. And is it something that Joe possibly deserved? Sure, I'll go with that. Yeah, he deserved it. But there's a lot of people in this whole series that deserve a lot more comeuppance that has yet to show up.
Kim, what did you get from Jeff and his wife? I mean, they're swingers. They're using cubs to get sex. He looks like he might work at a vape shop or just hang around one. Is he possibly in this murderer's row of odd people, the worst person that we've encountered?
He's disgusting. Everything about him just screams creep. Like, ugh. Ugh. Next question.
Ryan, we all know that I will do anything for love, but I won't do meth. But outside of the obvious animal abuse that just kind of turns your stomach about Joe, his affliction for young straight men by using meth and money, was that the most deplorable thing about him?
It's hard to say because, like, on one hand, it's like I don't think it's not the most deplorable thing when you consider like what was happening to the animals, and at least in those situations they're consenting. But I mean, as you've kind of alluded to, it's a sea of deplorable people and deplorable acts. So I mean, it's pretty bad, and I think obviously you're manipulating young people with drugs. And it is interesting that it's like they were, I guess tended to be young straight men who he was able to manipulate. But again, it's like they're still on some level consenting. So it can't be the most deplorable of his actions. But I mean, again, this is just, I mean, it's one of those things where just a sea of, again, people who are just always bad. And it's like from episode to episode, you change, you shift who you think is the worst. And that's kind of constantly changing. But I mean, it's all bad. It's hard to rank the different actions.
Yeah, I kind of felt bad for those young guys because they obviously, if you look at them, they've come from nothing. They were probably super poor growing up. So Kim, this guy kind of takes them under their wing, gives them a job, starts buying them expensive gifts and gets them hooked on hard drugs. And next thing you know, they're all three of them are married. Did you have any sympathy for them at all going through the story?
It's kind of a slippery slope to talk about because, I don't want to say anything that sounds like I'm gay bashing or anything like that or whatever, but there's obviously a lack of what the hell happened in these poor boys' life to make them think that this was their outlet. Like this is their only avenue that they had left was to marry two other dudes. I don't care who you want to marry as long as you're happy. I don't care, but that's strange to me, at least. That's my opinion. Some polygamous triangle filled with nothing but meth mouth. I mean, gross.
That meth mouth game is strong, too. One of the most shocking events during the series was the near on-camera death of Joe's husband, Travis. Do you think it was a tragic accident or was it suicide?
I think it was a tragic accident and stupidity incarnate because apparently the dude walked around all the time pointing his unloaded gun at people and playing pranks and everything else. And as a person who's spent a large portion of their life around firearms and everything, the cardinal rule is you never point the gun at something that you don't intend to kill. And this dude is pointing guns at all kinds of stuff and then tried to prove his point by pointing it at himself, pulling the trigger, and oops, I guess that didn't work out.
Ryan, Carol Baskin's Big Cat Rescue claims to be different from all the other zoos, not allowing contact with cubs, but still profiting off of having tigers in cages and paying her volunteers absolutely nothing. Is she just a con of a different color?
It's hard to say without actually, being there. And I think, with this being mostly, a true story, it was so heavily dramatized that it's a little difficult to tell. She definitely seems like she's a little bit savvier of a business person and definitely has done better marketing. And, I would think, so I guess the difference is, and so this is my issue is like, is it really like an animal sanctuary, and is the goal really to, save animals that were in bad situations, or is she really looking to profit? And some of the stuff with like the volunteers and the that's a little sketchy and weird to me. It's weird that we were at an animal sanctuary in Colorado that apparently a bunch of Joe Exotic's animals ended up at, but that place, like kind of having been there, is like a legitimate sanctuary. It's really nice. I highly recommend going. I think it's called the Wild Animal Sanctuary. And but hers seemed a little bit more like closer to Roadside Zoo, but they didn't. You don't interact with the tigers. But again, I haven't been there, so I don't know. But it just doesn't strike me as like her really doing something, really for the sake of the animals. It seems a little bit more like I'm going to market myself, and I'm just going to be like the mirror to Joe Exotic and the Roadside Zoos. But I don't know how much different it really is.
Yeah, I think if you're doing anything with animals, if you can get PETA on your side, you're golden. Like, she could really literally get away with anything as long as she keeps those people appeased. IG, we all know spouses that can't wait for their significant other to finish their sentence so they can quickly agree, mostly out of fear. Enter Carol's second husband, Howard Baskin. Now, you and I have both been tried marriages, and they've failed and they've worked. Knowing what we know about Carol, and Howard obviously knew that before he married her, her last husband may or may not have disappeared, and she may or may not have had something to do with it. Would you give that relationship a go?
No, I'm out on that completely. No, like as soon as I figure out who that person is, like I'm ghosting as hard as I can. I'm probably moving. I'm changing all my phone numbers. I'm going to go somewhere else, because that guy, to his credit, really kind of does whatever Carol wants, including putting on a collar and a leash and like crouching at her feet. So I know that, like, it's the latest political threat or insult to call someone a cuck, but that dude is a cuck, right? That is a dude that will just literally, like, he doesn't stand up and do his own way, because I think he knows, like, he could become lunch. They got a lot of cats to feed. Something's got to happen, but holy cow, I don't know why you would put yourself in that situation if you know that you will have no absolute right or possibility to do anything that she doesn't want you to do ever. It just doesn't seem like, marriage is supposed to kind of be two-way street sometimes, at least a little bit. And that's not happening at all. Because, those pictures right after they got married and everything was, Carol is most definitely a top. And I'm sure that there's some pegging going on in that relationship.
That very well might be the case. Who knows? Howard there, he just came across as completely spineless and somebody that just lives to be told what to do. And I just found it funny that as she's talking, he's just constantly nodding his head because he doesn't want to get hit again. Kim, I'm just going to come right out and ask it. Did Carol kill Don? And did the Don subplot save the documentary from being a complete shit show?
So there was one thing that I noticed between her as well as Joe Exotic, and that's that neither one of them showed any amount of empathy whatsoever for a loss of a spouse, for somebody losing a limb, for anything other than the glory of themselves. And when people would bring it up to Carol Baskin about the loss of her husband, she would just kind of nonchalantly shrug it off like, well, it's just one of those things. No, bitch, it's not. Your husband is missing. How are you not caring? Right? Do I think that she did it? Absolutely. Do I think she's guilty of sin? Yes. But do I think that Joe Exotic is innocent? No. That man is nuttier than a squirrel turd.
Everything about the Don situation screams I'm guilty, from the stealing of the will to the changing of the verbiage of it, not upon my death, but if I should disappear.
Right. Right.
How incompetent do they have to be down there to let this fall through the cracks? Somebody got paid and paid well.
Florida.
But still, there's due process. There's people in charge. At some point, somebody was thumbing through these documents and just said, yeah, good enough. I'll stamp it and I'll go to the beach.
No, Joe, honey, cynic, you are thinking with logic, and that doesn't apply here. Okay, it's Florida.
All right, we'll give you that.
Emphasis on the duh.
IG, they just announced an expansion into the Taggerverse as Investigation Discovery is taking Don's disappearance and going to investigate it. Could Joe Exotic finally have the last laugh on Carol?
Oh, yeah, he might, but unless he somehow is no longer incarcerated, that's going to be a pretty muffled laugh. He did enough bad things and got caught for that, but I don't know, maybe they'll do something just like weirdly like poetic And maybe they have a women's block at the same prison that Joe's being held at, and they can move Carol into that one too, and they can be closer than ever before. That, my friends, would win the internet. We could just shut it down then. We don't need it anymore. It's all been done. If we can put Carol and Joe in the same place and they can meet through the fence in the yard or something and hurl expletives at one another, like, then I'm done. I'm done watching everything. I can just go lay down and die because the world has ended.
Oh, God.
I think the majority of the people we met during the course of this documentary all need to be in jail. Like, there's not a good person among the bunch. It's like an episode of It's Always Sunny in Philadelphia. Like, they're all literally scumbags. They're compelling scumbags, but they're scumbags. Ryan, the plot to kill Carol Baskin lands former presidential candidate Joe Exotic in jail for murder for hire. Is he a pawn in a game that he may have started and instigated, or was he just set up and just running his mouth and saying stupid things in passing that the people like Jeff Lowe took and ran to the government with? And your final thoughts on the series and your rating?
I think he's a guy who couldn't get out of his own way. So, yeah, and, you know, an example of hubris and somebody who's clearly charismatic, but not the brightest guy in the world. You know, not knowing when to quit. And he had multiple opportunities, and so it's kind of hard to feel bad for him. I think he's guilty. I just think the guy's like, he just didn't know when to quit and just say, you know, this is not worth me losing my livelihood and losing my business. Yeah, the documentary was compelling. I hope that it does bring to light, you know, to people just this underbelly of you know, our country, but all over there. You know, I mean, Thailand is awful with these kinds of things, that people are more aware that, like, the, you know, which I think, so here's one of the issues I had with the show is it's so dramatized and such a wacky, crazy story that I think it doesn't point a light as much as it could have on just how bad these kinds of roadside zoos are and how bad it is kind of allowing people to, you know, have exotic animals with very minimal restrictions in some of these places. So, you know, I hope that the light that it did shine on it will help, you know, maybe bring more people will be aware of it and talk about it, and maybe we'll get more documentaries kind of based on that. It was a train wreck and a soap opera, and, you know, one of the, you know, I mean, I think we all binged it pretty much within a day or two. And obviously it's one of the biggest things on the, you know, on the internet, especially with everybody being stuck at home right now. So I give it a, you know, for entertainment value, it's got to be a 9. You know, probably blurs the lines of reality. You know, is it the greatest documentary in the world? No. If I was going to technically grade it, probably get a 6 or 7, but it was a blast. I had a good time watching it, and it's just such a wacky, crazy story.
So when I first set out to watch this, it was more or less under peer pressure because I saw several of my friends had been posting about how glorious of a dumpster fire this show was on the internet, and that I just absolutely had to check it out. So I did. And honestly, I didn't know what exactly to expect. I knew very little about it. I, honest to God, entered into it thinking this is about some homosexual dude who happens to run a tiger farm. I wasn't expecting everything else that followed. And I was curious, how are they going to stretch this out over this many episodes? And then I got my answer, and holy Moses. I don't really get into reality TV all that much. I've never seen a single episode of the Kardashians nonsense or anything like that. So this was kind of an out there, outside of my normal comfort zone type of show to watch. But it was a glorious dumpster fire. And every single time I thought, nope, he's guilty. Then something would happen that would make me question, am I right? No, maybe it's her. Oh, maybe they both are. Right? Like, it kind of kept me guessing. And so for that fact, I'm going to give it an 8 as well. I thought it was, if nothing else, purely entertaining and absolute nonsense to watch. And truthfully, I kind of needed that right now. And I am excited that Netflix is dropping a new episode tomorrow. So that's going to be interesting to see what they have to say in that.
So most of us live or have been around or see somewhere in large cities. And right now we're all under quarantine. So seeing the car accident where you get to rubberneck, or the crazy person with the fun and sign on the corner trying to collect dollars, or, you know, people wearing, sandals with socks and things like that. We're out of that. We're not seeing any of that. So we were all in a serious lack of crazy in our life. So what the Tiger King did was gave it all to us in one fell swoop. So you got a concentrated, like, absolute dumpster fire, train wreck, the biggest 2,700 car pileup you could ever possibly see, all in a nice little neat package that y'all got to watch at once. So this hit at the absolute perfect time when we're all going into social distancing and many people are staying at home, where it gave you something to literally take your mind off of everything else that was going on. So our ratings on this might be a little bit skewed because we aren't seeing our normal level of crazy out in the world. That being said, this was an entertaining level of crazy, and there was some of the method following, just kind of like Making a Murderer did up in Wisconsin, where you go through those episodes and then you're like, he did it, he didn't do it, he did it, he didn't do it. And they're framing him, they're not framing him. Same kind of thing here. It's like, oh, no, Carol's worse, Joe's worse, Doc Antil's worse. And it just keeps you moving around. And that's the fun in this show, is that, and at the end of any given episode, like I said earlier, the championship belt of I am the king of lunacy moved to a new person. Well, that's the things that we crave in our daily existence, watching somebody else, because it honestly makes us feel more normal, because I'm not trying to raise tigers and feed ex-spouses to them in the backyard. So that's great. Honestly, it's terrible television, but it is so entertaining. And the memes that have come out of it have kept it alive way longer than it would have on its own. So I enjoyed it, and it was something that we needed to take away from all of the craziness and all of the sadness and everything else that's going on in our world today. So I think with all that being said and everything coming together, I'm going to give it like an 8.5. I think it was needed, and it just hit at the perfect time.
I'm going to agree with you, IG. I mean, I'm not someone who's too proud to admit when he's wrong. And I was definitely guilty judging a book by its cover. I had zero interest in watching this, and I was kind of annoyed at the memes at first. But then I watched it, and I just thought, this is a little bit more Jerry Springer-like culture, being outlandish and being unusual, and something that was a sideshow that became almost main stage in our lives as we kind of continue to descent back into Neanderthals. It actually turned out to be a compelling, interesting story with really outlandish and fun characters. And I think this dropped at the right time. They used kind of the playbook from Making a Murderer, like IG said, but it also had a sense of humor, which that didn't. So over the course of whatever 10 or 12 episodes of Making a Murderer, it just got more and more depressing as you watch these people's lives be taken away from them, whether they were guilty or not, who knew. But with these people, they this lifestyle, it's colorful. The characters deliver in every episode. You go from liking one to hating the next to being befuddled how these people even exist in society. And it opened the door to a greater mystery to me. And that's what happened to Carol's husband, Don. I hold this in the same light as Making a Murderer as far as quality, but it had a little bit more fun in it. And Netflix shows once again that they have a unique eye for content. I'm going to go ahead and give the Tiger King, I'd say about an 8.5 or a 9. And I'll probably sit through it again just for ha-has and because there's just a lack of things going on. Please, sports, come back soon.
Follow the podcast on Twitter, Facebook, and at cynicradio.com. Available for download on iTunes.